Thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon from LI-COR Biosciences here in cold, snowy Lincoln, Nebraska. It's so nice to see so many of you joining us, at least virtually, for our webinar today. In today's webinar, we're going to be covering some general tips to help you with your measurements. Many of our longtime users may know some of these tips already, but we hope that each of you will find something beneficial in the webinar. This will be in the style of a late-night top 10 countdown, although I will not be attempting to be as funny or not as funny as those people. So, let's go ahead and begin with number 10. Number 10. Use transparent tape to seal the 3-hole gasket at the back of the chamber for one-sided measurements. One-sided measurements are typically made to determine the stomatal ratio of the top and the bottom of the leaf. So, if you want to find out just how many stomates are on each side, you can block off the top half of the 6400's air path. You will need to flip your leaf over to get the ratio of each side, but once you have that, you can enter it into the 6400's calculations and use that to make your measurements just a little bit more customized. The instrument does have a default of 1, which means that there is equal amounts on each side, but not all plants have an equal amount of stomates on each side. So, you can go ahead and use this to determine whether it is indeed 1.
Elizabeth, I'm going to stop you here really quick. We have some questions coming in already. And I have one here from Jack, and he asks, what about using propofilm to seal the 3-hole gasket?
Well, that's a great question, Jack. And it's true that you can use propofilm to seal the hole. The benefit of using transparent tape is that it stays in place even when you open the chamber up to change leaves or even change plants. Additionally, it's a little easier to see. Propofilm is very clear, which is the benefit of it, but it also makes it a little hard to find if you happen to drop it. So transparent tape is easier to see and it's harder to drop. Thank you very much for the question. Now, let's move on to number 9. Tip number 9 is using poster tack to seal leaf chamber gaskets. Poster tack is that blue or yellow or gray substance that you can use to put up posters in places that don't allow nail holes in the walls, like university residence halls. It's sold under a variety of names depending on what country you live in: sticky tack, blue tack, and several other trademarked names. So you'll need to find out what type it is in your country, but the benefit of it is that it's both reusable and gas impermeable. If you're working with a plant with dissected leaves, a large midrib, or even a large petiole, it can be used to seal any sources of leaks without damaging the plant or damaging the instrument. Just mold a small chunk of it around the hole and then go on with your measurements. When you're done, you can just remove the poster tack, go on to your next leaf, and when you're completely done with your measurements, you can use that poster tack to put that picture of Celine Dion back on your wall. So, tip number 8, we'll move on. You can use cable ties to close the chamber when you're working with delicate leaves. The action of latching the chamber handle can very briefly apply a little bit more pressure than some very delicate leaves prefer. If you use a cable tie, similar to the one that keeps the LI-6400 handle closed in initial shipping, you can seal the chamber completely to prevent leaks without placing extra pressure on your leaf. So what you'll do is you'll just tighten the tie until the chamber is closed when the tie is at the front of the handle, then slide it back to allow the chamber to open. You may not be able to open the chamber completely because of the tightness of the tie, but you should still be able to insert your sample into the chamber.
These are some really great tips, Elizabeth. I have a lot of comments coming in about how useful these are going to be for people in the field. I have a question here from Rosa, and she asks, what kind of cable ties should I use?
That's a great question, Rosa. The readjustable cable ties are often better for this application because of the fact that you may have leaves of different widths or sizes or something like that. And so if you use a readjustable cable tie, you can just use a small screwdriver to loosen the cable tie and then tighten it again, rather than cutting off your cable tie or having to worry about not being able to open your chamber fully to get your leaf in there, which is either wasteful of plastic or very frustrating to try to fit a plant in there when there just isn't enough room, which hasn't happened to me at all in graduate school or anything like that. Okay, we're going to go on to tip number 7. Thank you very much for your question, Rosa. I'm glad you asked that. Tip number 7 is that you can control chamber humidity levels by changing the flow rate as well as the scrub knob setting. The scrub/bypass knob, we know, is there to help you control your humidity levels. If you put it to bypass, you get as much humidity as in the air. If you put it to scrub, you get no humidity. And we generally recommend that you do not do that, since plants do prefer to have a little bit of water. But, you can adjust it. The other thing you can do to adjust your chamber humidity levels is reduce your flow rate. As you can see on the graph, if I change my scrub setting from scrub to bypass, I gain a little bit more humidity. But if I change my setting from scrub to bypass and lower my flow rate from 500, which is the default, to 100, which is the minimum you can use with a external CO2 source, you see that my humidity has increased quite a bit, and the delta of my humidity in those two methods is very large. So this will give you a lot more humidity to work with. Now, the caveat is that it will slow down your measurements because of the fact that you do need to take longer to flush the chamber when you have a slower flow rate. However, in extremely arid environments, a slower flow rate and the slower measurements that accompany it may well be worth having the extra humidity to make sure that your plant really is functioning photosynthetically as best as possible. Okay, tip number 6. You can use water, simple water, to both regenerate your soda lime and add extra humidity. Say you've changed your flow rate to 100, and you've put your humidity level to full bypass, and you still are not getting the kind of humidity that your plant needs. Well, you can use your soda lime tube to help you with that. It's a very simple procedure that you can do without even turning the instrument off, although you obviously shouldn't take measurements when you don't have a scrub tube on. That will change your environmental conditions quite a bit. So what you'll do is you'll remove the soda lime tube and open it, then use a lab squirt bottle to add 10 mils of water to the soda lime tube. Then close the chemical tube, remember to tap on the threads to dislodge any dust to make sure that your seal is good. Shake the tube to prevent any clumping of your soda lime, and then put the tube right back on the console and keep going. You'll have added water to your airstream, and you'll have regenerated your soda lime, so you won't need to change it as often. Soda lime is wet. When it dries out, it doesn't take up CO2. We add more water, it is obviously able to take up more CO2 again. And there's actually someone here who's been using the same tube of soda lime for about a year by using this little trick, which is very, very good for your chemical usage rates.
Elizabeth, I have one quick question before you move on from Mari, and she asks, what kind of water? Is it okay to use tap water?
That is a wonderful question, and the answer is no. It is not okay to use tap water. You should definitely use deionized or purified water of some type. Tap water has a lot of interesting chemicals and metal salts in it, and so you don't necessarily want those to be getting into your instrument. You don't necessarily need to find the nano-pure water in your building or institution, but you should definitely use purified water of some type, just to be sure that you're not going to affect the instrument in some way. And we've gotten halfway through. So we have a little poll to celebrate getting halfway through the webinar. Thank you very much for paying attention and being here for this webinar. We appreciate it. So the question is, how can you check for leaks in your sensor head? And your options are blow around the chamber, look at your gaskets, examine your O-rings, or all of the above?
All right, thanks for the question, Elizabeth. I've launched the poll, and if our audience could select their answer choices, I will close the poll here as soon as our audience is finished answering. It looks like we have around 83% of you voted so far. I'll just wait just a couple more minutes. All right, 96% of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll.
Okay, it looks like most of the people have answered the poll. Thank you everyone for participating. And the answer to the question, in this case, every answer is right. All of these methods are important in hunting for leaks. And we're going to come back to the individual methods a little bit later in the webinar. So, let's move on to tip number 5. The low battery beep can be very frustrating and very stressful at times, especially if you're in the middle of a measurement. But there are ways to swap out empty batteries for full ones without stress or data loss. And we have a little bit an animation here to show you what you're going to do. So first, we have a 6400XT, and it has 2 batteries that are very low on their charge, and it's beeping. And we're stressed out about that. So we need to change those batteries. The first thing we do is we take a new, fresh battery, and we attach it to one of the battery leads. Now, when you take off the used battery, the instrument is probably going to tell you that it's going to shut down in either 60 or 10 seconds, but that's okay because we have a fresh battery right there. As soon as you plug it in, it'll say battery okay now, and everything will be fine. If it doesn't say battery okay now, you should probably go grab another battery very quickly. Because perhaps what you thought was a full battery wasn't, which occasionally happens. So we've got this full battery, and it's now running the instrument. The next thing we're going to do is take out those 2 empty batteries. You should always change your batteries in pairs. That way you know that both batteries are good. If you have one battery that's good and one battery that's not, you end up changing your batteries pretty much constantly, and it really slows down the flow and the rhythm of your measurements. And you know, when you're doing a lot of survey measurements, you just really do get into kind of a groove where you're just getting it done. And you don't want to stop in the middle to change a battery every 5 seconds, or what it seems like every 5 seconds. So change them both. You've still got the fresh battery powering your instrument, so you don't have to worry about losing data. Then add another fresh battery into the empty battery compartment. Now you've got 2 fresh batteries powering the instrument, and you've got a backup. So we have our 2 fresh batteries, and everything is fine. The next thing we're going to do, disconnect the first battery we put in, because of the fact that we need to get that into the battery bay. Right now, it's outside of the battery bay. And that was useful for us when we were changing the battery originally, because if you're trying to rush and you're trying to get the battery in, get the battery out, you know, you may get a little bit flustered. It's better to just leave it out of the battery bay and put it in later when you already have another battery in the battery bay running the instrument. The final thing, put that first battery into the empty battery bay, and you're done. You have a fresh 6400 set of batteries. You can go on with your measurements. You haven't lost any data. You haven't lost any time. And you can just go on with your measurements without having to worry about that really annoying low battery beep. Okay, so that's hopeful. That will help you with that. Another thing that will help you is tip number 4. When you're checking for leaks, blow out 1 birthday candle, not 50. It's true that some of our users may have 50 birthday candles on their birthday cake, but if you blow too hard, it can create the illusion of a leak due to mass flow through the foam gaskets. So, it's better to just gently puff 1 candle or 1 cupcake from one of those little cupcake shops that everybody loves at different locations on the sensor head. Do the front, do the sides, do the top, do the bottom. Pay special attention to the point at which the chamber attaches to the main sensor head. There are O-rings there. If they're missing, you may notice a leak by blowing on that seam of metal. And then check your CO2 values after you've done each of those things. If your CO2 value goes up more than a ppm or two, you might have a leak. So you should go through the leak hunting procedures in Chapter 20 of the manual. And I suspect you'll find that a screw isn't tightened, or an O-ring isn't present, or a gasket is a little bit loose, or something like that. Speaking of gaskets and O-rings, tip number 3 is to always check your gaskets and O-rings. Gaskets and O-rings are what we call consumables, which means they will eventually wear out. For your gaskets, both top and bottom, and the one that covers the hole at the back that we were talking about earlier with the transparent tape tip, make sure there isn't a channel indented in your foam by a large midrib. Make sure there isn't debris under the adhesive. Make sure it isn't torn or anything like that. For your O-rings, make sure that not only are they present, that's important, but also that there are no pieces of rubber starting to separate from the main body of the O-ring, no little rubber thread starting somewhere, and that the O-ring isn't cracked, permanently stretched, or, in the worst case scenario, actually in pieces. When in doubt, change it out. These are relatively inexpensive parts, and it is so much better to change your gaskets and O-rings more often than you need to than to worry about leaks or not having good measurement quality.
All right, Elizabeth, I have a question here from Jiang, and I have a feeling that several of our users have this question as they are thinking about gaskets. And Jiang asks, my gaskets are different colors. Does it matter which one I use? Is there a difference?
That's a great question, Jiang, and the answer is yes. It does matter which you use, and there is a difference. If you're using the 6400 O2B red-blue light source, you should be sure to use the white gaskets on that particular light source. You can use the black gaskets on the bottom, and you can use the black gaskets if you're using the clear top chamber. But if you're using the O2B, you must use the white gaskets. It's related to the light quality coming out of the LED tile and the fact that white gaskets reflect the light down into the chamber where black gaskets absorb them. The other difference between them is that, partially related to the fact that they're different colors, they're slightly different types of foam. Your white gaskets aren't going to bounce back from a large amount of pressure or a large midrib as much as your black gaskets are. Your black gaskets are very robust. We once put them under a chair leg here overnight, and the next day we could use them and they were fine. The white gaskets won't do that, so you really have to be careful of the white gaskets, especially if you notice that it looks like it's getting a little indented. Go ahead and change it out, just to be on the safe side to avoid leaks. Thank you very much for your question. I'm sure that a lot of people were asking that, because, when I started using the 6400, I had the same question. I didn't understand why we had two different gasket colors, and I think I probably used the wrong gasket color a time or two. Okay, let's move on to tip number 2, which is that the clock is running for your CO2 cartridge. You have 8 hours from the time you pierce the pin on the cartridge, whether you use the instrument or not, if you're using the 12-gram cylinders that we sell. After that time, you will need to replace your cartridge with a new cartridge. And, whether you use the instrument or not, 8 hours, replace that cartridge. If your new cartridge is in a new box, also, remember to check your oil filter. If it's dirty, change it out. It is another consumable. It's just a cigarette filter. You'll have one in every box of new CO2 cylinders, and it is much better to go through a lot of cigarette filters than to risk having oil in your tubing or your console or somewhere like that. It almost always means your instrument has to take a little jaunt back to Nebraska if you get oil in your console, because not surprisingly, air-related parts do not react well to having oil in them, so it's always better to avoid that if possible. And there are ways in the troubleshooting section and the maintenance section that you can kind of fix it if you did get a little bit of oil in there, but it's better to just change your filter and avoid the whole problem. Another aspect of that is you should always be sure to use LI-COR brand cylinders. A lot of the other branded cylinders have a lot of oil in them, a lot more oil than ours do, and that's going to clog your cigarette filter to the point that it might not be able to stop all that oil, and then it goes right into your instrument. So don't just buy the paintball gun CO2 cylinders. Paintball guns aren't as precise, well, most of them aren't anyway, as a 6400, although I've seen some very high-end paintball guns once or twice. But just to be on the safe side, use the LI-COR brand. Well, it looks like we've actually gotten to almost the end of our presentation. We're up to our last tip, and I'm betting that our more experienced users have almost figured out what this last tip is going to be, because there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet that is very, very important for using the 6400. And let's see if that's the one that you thought it is. If you thought it was matching, you're right. Matching sends the same air through your sample and reference chambers, which equilibrates the analyzers. It makes sure that they're reading the same air and seeing the same values. And so this will save you a lot of headaches. You'll know that you don't have any offset in one chamber due to something. So when should you match? Well, you should match when you start. You should match when your photosynthesis rates are low. You should match after large CO2 concentration changes. You should match after large flow rate changes. And you should match every 30 minutes. Matching usually takes about a minute total. And there are very few things more frustrating than taking data for 24 hours, doing a diurnal measurement, and then realizing you can't use all or part of it because you forgot to match at some point or at the beginning, which is even worse. And we always hate having those conversations with customers, to have to tell them that because of the fact that their data file shows they didn't match, we can't trust any of their data, and that they may need to go back and do that measurement again, and the growth stage may have passed. So it's very frustrating. Take the short period of time and match, just to save yourself a lot of headaches.
Thanks, Elizabeth. These tips you've been giving are really, really great. We've had a lot of questions coming in. I have just a couple more I'd like to ask you. The first one is related to your number 1 tip, and Mitch asks, can I match more often than every 30 minutes?
That is a wonderful question, Mitch, and the answer is yes. You can absolutely match more often than every 30 minutes. We recommend every 30 minutes, but you can match especially if you're doing survey measurements. You can match every time you change a plant if you want to. I was actually taught to match after every single time I changed a plant in graduate school, so that's my training. And the official LI-COR guideline is at the minimum every 30 minutes. But if you want to match more often than that, that just means that your measurements will just be a little bit more precise, and who doesn't like more precise measurements?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Our last question here is from Katrina, and she asks, I just ordered a new bottle of diorite, and I noticed that it's a different color. What changed?
Katrina, good color spotting. There is a difference in the new diorite we've started sending out. Formerly, we used the indicating diorite rather, which is blue and changes to pink when it gets exhausted. But due to some law changes in Europe, it was getting harder for us to sell that particular kind of diorite there. So we thought, well, it's silly to have one stock for the US and one stock for Europe, and besides, if cobalt is a carcinogen in Europe, it is probably also a carcinogen in the US, so we just changed our diorite over completely. You now have non-indicating diorite. It works the same as the indicating, but it doesn't have the color changing tell for you. The one thing that we also included with it is you have a little bottle of orange pellets. Those are silica gel pellets. You can use those for color indication if you want that. If you want the visual indication of when your diorite is exhausted, you can usually tell looking at your data, But if you want the visual indication, you can also use the little bottle of orange pellets. They change to clear when they're exhausted. And the instructions for using all of that are on the back of the dry ride bottle. So we're not going to go into those, but you can definitely still use that, and good color spotting. Well, that's all the time we have for now. We're so glad that you came to our webinar, and if you do have any questions, do feel free to ask them either of our panelists here or via email or phone via our environmental tech support. I am one of the people who you would talk to if you called the 1-800 number. I will be happy to answer any questions for you. I hope the rest of your day or evening goes well, and let's sign off from Lincoln, Nebraska.